Caleb Washington ripped the check in half, then in half again, and let the pieces fall at the stranger's polished boots. "You drove 3 hours to insult me," he said. "Now drive 3 hours back." The man in the gray suit only smiled because he knew something Caleb didn't. In 72 hours, this ranch wouldn't belong to a Washington anymore. But neither of them noticed the woman at the gate. The woman who would look at 600 acres of trouble and whisper the words that changed everything. If you're watching, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story has traveled. And if you believe a man should never have to carry his whole world alone, subscribe and stay till the end. The pieces of the check were still fluttering across the gravel when Marcus Sterling bent down unbothered and picked one up between two fingers like a man collecting a receipt. $240,000, Sterling said. He turned the torn corner so Caleb could read the zeros. "You just tore up $240,000, Mr. Washington. I want you to remember that you did that. Not me. You. Get off my land. Your land." Sterling let the paper drop. He straightened the cuff of his sleeve. "That's the part I keep circling back to. See, I've read the file. Denton County Records Office open to the public, anybody can walk in. You're 4 payments behind on a note your daddy took out and never finished. The bank's already called it. So when you say your land, I hear a man who's confused about the calendar." Caleb's jaw worked once. He didn't answer. He'd learned a long time ago that the moment you started explaining yourself to a man like this, you'd already lost. "I'm not here to fight you." Sterling went on softer now, the way a man softens his voice right before he takes something. "I'm here to save you. You understand the difference, 600 acres. Drought's cooked half of it. Cattle prices are in the dirt. You're doing the work of 6 men with 2 hands and no help, and you're losing anyway. I've watched better operations than yours fold in a season. I'm offering you a way out before the bank takes it for free. You're offering me 20 cents on the dollar and calling it a rescue." Sterling smiled again. It was a patient smile. A smile that had all the time in the world, because time was the one thing he could afford, and Caleb couldn't. 72 hours, Sterling said. "That's what the bank's giving you. I checked. After that, the note's in default, the property goes to auction, and I buy it at auction for less than I'm offering you today, with none of the paperwork, none of the courtesy, and none of this conversation. So," he spread his hands, "you can take my money and walk away with your dignity. Or you can take nothing and walk away with neither." From the porch of the house, a small voice called out, "Daddy." Caleb's whole body changed. The stiffness in his shoulders didn't leave, but it turned away from Sterling, turned toward the porch, toward the 8-year-old girl standing there in a jean jacket 2 sizes too big, her hair in the 2 puffs her mama used to do before her mama was gone. "Go back inside, Nia," Caleb said. His voice came out gentle. It was the only gentle thing on that whole property that morning. "Is the man buying our cows?" "Nobody's buying anything. Go finish your cereal. Bus is in 20 minutes. Nia looked at Sterling. 8 years old, and she looked at that man the way a barn cat looks at a coyote, not scared, just measuring. Then she went inside and let the screen door bang. Sterling watched the door swing shut. "Cute kid," he said. "Be a shame for her to grow up watching her father lose everything 1 week at a time. Kids remember that. The losing, they carry it." Something moved behind Caleb's eyes. For 1/2 of 1 second, Sterling saw it, and Sterling enjoyed it. "You've got my number," Sterling said. He turned and walked back toward the black SUV idling by the gate, its engine too clean and too quiet for a dirt road. 72 hours, Mr. Washington. I'll be honest with you, I hope you say no. I make more money when men like you say no." The SUV pulled away. Caleb stood in the drive until the dust settled, and then a while longer, because standing there was easier than turning around and walking back into a house where the refrigerator was making a noise. It shouldn't, and the electric bill was on the counter, unopened, and his daughter was waiting for a father who had it all figured out. He didn't have it figured out. He hadn't had it figured out in 3 years. The bus came at 7:42. It was always 7:42, and Nia was always at the end of the drive at 7:40, backpack on, lunch in hand, because Caleb had taught her that a Washington was never late and never made anyone wait on them. "You didn't eat," he said, walking her down. I ate. 2 bites of cereal isn't eating. You didn't eat either, Nia said. 8 years old, and she'd already learned to trade his own weapons back at him. Caleb almost smiled. Almost. That's different. Why's it different? Because I'm the daddy and you're the kid, and the daddy doesn't have to answer questions before 8 in the morning. Nia rolled her eyes exactly the way her mother used to, and it hit Caleb somewhere under the ribs the way it always did, the way it probably always would. Denise had been gone 3 years, and she still showed up in the smallest gestures. The eye roll the way Nia hummed when she was thinking, the way she planted her feet when she'd decided something and wasn't going to be moved. Is the ranch in trouble? Nia asked. The bus was coming over the rise now, still a quarter-mile off. Where'd you hear that? I hear things. What kind of things? You on the phone at night. You think I'm asleep. She looked up at him. You say numbers, and then you get quiet, and then you don't sleep. Caleb crouched down so he was level with her. He put his rough hand on her shoulder, and he made his voice as steady as he knew how, because a father's steady voice was the last thing that still worked when everything else was breaking. Listen to me, he said. This ranch has been in our family 101 years. Your great-great-granddaddy bought it with money he wasn't supposed to be allowed to have in a place where a man like him wasn't supposed to be allowed to own anything. And every Washington since has kept it. Through the Dust Bowl. Through 2 wars. Through years worse than this one. He tapped her chest right over her heart once. You hear me, worse than this one. And it's still ours. It's gonna stay ours. That's not something you need to carry. That's something I carry. Understand? Nia studied his face the way she studied everything, completely without blinking. Okay, she said finally. Okay. But you should still eat. The bus hissed to a stop. The doors folded open. Nia hugged him hard around the neck, quick and fierce. And then she was up the steps and gone. And Caleb stood at the end of his own driveway and lifted one hand to a bus driver he'd known for 15 years, and he held the smile on his face until the bus was over the next rise. And then he let it fall because there was no one left to hold it up for. Then he turned around and went back to work. Bunk. The fence in the north pasture had been down for 2 days. Caleb had known it was down for 2 days and hadn't had the daylight to fix it. And now 3 head of cattle had wandered through, and one of them, a heifer he'd been counting on for the spring, had gotten into the low ground and torn her leg open on the old harrow he'd been meaning to haul off for a year. He found her at the bottom of the draw, standing wrong, the blood already black on her cannon bone. No, Caleb said. Just that. No. Come on, not you, not today. He got a rope on her. He got her up the slope, slow cussing under his breath, and then apologizing to her under his breath the way a man does when he's spent too many hours alone with animals. He got her into the pen. He knelt in the mud and looked at the wound, and knew before he even had the light on it that it was bad. Deep. It would need a vet, and a vet was $200 he did not have, and if he didn't call the vet, he'd lose her, and if he lost her, that was another $1,100 gone on top of everything else. He knelt there in the cold, with his hand pressed against the animal's shoulder, and he did the math, and the math was the same math it always was. There was no version of it where he came out whole. His hands were bleeding. He noticed it distantly. The wire had opened up 2 of his knuckles, and he hadn't felt it happen. He wiped them on his jeans. He got his phone out. He called the vet. Doc, it's Caleb Washington. A pause. Yeah, I know it's early. A pause. I got a heifer opened up on the old harrow north end. It's deep. A longer pause, and Caleb closed his eyes, because he knew what was coming. Doc, I know. I know I still owe you from October. His jaw tightened. Can you put it on the account, please? I'm asking you to put it on the account, and I'm telling you I'm good for it. You've known my family 30 years. Have we ever? No, we haven't. That's right. So put it on the account and come save my cow. He hung up before the man could answer, because if the man had said no, Caleb didn't think he could have stayed standing. The vet came. The heifer lived for now. The account grew, and that was Tuesday. Like, The letter from First Cattleman's Bank came on Wednesday. Caleb read it standing at the mailbox. He read it twice. He read it a third time because his eyes kept sliding off the important word, the way your mind refuses a thing it doesn't want to hold. And the important word was accelerated, and the phrase under it was full balance due, and the number under that was $189,000, and the date next to that number was 3 days away. 72 hours. Sterling hadn't been bluffing. Sterling never bluffed. Sterling had known about this letter before Caleb did because Sterling had someone at the bank, or Sterling had someone at the county, or Sterling simply had money, and money hears things before working men do. Caleb walked back up to the house. He sat down at the kitchen table. He laid the letter flat and smoothed it with his bleeding hand, and he sat there in the quiet with the refrigerator, making its dying noise. And for the first time in 3 years, for the first time since the day he'd stood in a hospital hallway and been told there was nothing more anyone could do, Caleb Washington put his face in his hands. He didn't cry. He'd have told you he didn't have it left in him. But he sat there a long time with his face in his hands, and the number on the table did not get any smaller. When he finally lifted his head, he made 3 calls. The first was to the bank to a loan officer named Pete, who'd played high school ball with Caleb's cousin. Pete was kind. Pete was sorry. Pete had escalated it as far as it goes. Caleb, I swear to you. And the answer was still the answer. The second was to his brother in Denver, who had a good job and a good wife and a good house, and who Caleb had never once asked for a dime in his life. Caleb didn't ask this time either. He got as far as, I'm in a spot, and his brother said, how much? And Caleb said the number, and there was a silence on the line so long that Caleb finally said, forget it, forget I called. How's the kids? And they talked about the kids for 4 minutes and then hung up, and Caleb crossed his brother off a list he'd never wanted to write. The third call he almost didn't make. He made it standing at the window looking out at 600 acres of the only thing his family had ever truly owned. He dialed the number off the torn business card he'd taped back together and stuck to the refrigerator, because even furious, even insulted, some animal part of a drowning man keeps the rope in reach. Sterling answered on the second ring. Mr. Washington, I was starting to think I'd hear from the auctioneer before I heard from you. Caleb closed his eyes. The number you offered. 240. Make it 3. A soft laugh, almost fond. It was 240 on Monday. It's 210 today. It'll be 180 tomorrow. That's how this works, Mr. Washington. Every day you spend being proud, the number goes down, because every day you spend being proud, we both know a little more about how this ends. A pause. Say yes today at 210, and I'll cover the vet bill you ran up Tuesday as a gesture of good faith. See, I even know about the cow. Caleb opened his eyes. He looked out at the land. At the barn his grandfather had raised with his own hands. At the fence line that ran to the horizon, that had run to the horizon before Caleb was born, and that he had always assumed would run to the horizon after he was gone with Nia's kids on the other side of it. No, Caleb said, and he hung up. He didn't know why he said it. He'd tell you later he didn't decide it, that it came up out of him from someplace older than his own mind, someplace where 101 years of Washingtons stood shoulder to shoulder, and none of them would let his mouth say yes. He hung up the phone, and he stood there, shaking, terrified, out of options, and out of road, and he had never in his life felt so completely, perfectly alone. That was when the truck he didn't recognize came up his drive. Ta! It was an old truck. That was the first thing. Not Sterling's kind of vehicle, no shine on it. Mud to the door handles, a dent in the tailgate somebody had learned to live with. It came up the drive slow, the way a person drives when they're not sure they're welcome, and it stopped a respectful distance from the house, and a woman got out. Caleb was already off the porch by the time her boots hit the gravel. He wasn't in the mood. He'd used up every ounce of patience he had on Sterling, on the bank, on the vet, on the letter, and whatever this was, whoever this was, he had nothing left to give it. We're not buying, he said, before she'd even shut the truck door. Whatever it is, not selling either, and if Sterling sent you, you can turn that truck around right now and save us both the— Nobody sent me. She had a steady voice. She didn't step toward him, didn't step back either. Just stood by her truck with her hands loose at her sides, letting him get it out of his system. My name's Emily Hartwell. I was hired by the bank 6 weeks ago to appraise properties in default in this county. She paused. Yours was on the list. Caleb's face went to stone. So you're here to price it. For them. For the auction. I was. Emily Hartwell looked past him, then really looked, the way most people didn't. She looked at the barn, at the pens, at the fence line, running out to the horizon, and Caleb watched her eyes move across all of it. And there was something in the way she looked at it that wasn't the way an appraiser looks at a number. I finished the appraisal Monday, she said. I turned it in Tuesday. She looked back at him. And then I couldn't stop thinking about it, so I drove back out here on my own time to tell you something you're not supposed to hear from someone in my position. She took a breath. The bank's valuation is wrong. Sterling's offer is a robbery. And you are sitting on more money than any of them want you to know you have, and you're about to hand it to them for pennies because you're too tired and too alone to see it. Caleb didn't say anything. He couldn't for a second. He'd braced for another Sterling, another Pete, another polite voice come to help him lose. He hadn't braced for this. You don't know anything about this ranch, he said finally. It came out harder than he meant it. I know it ran 400 head at capacity, and it's running under 90 now, Emily said. I know your late father was rotating pastures on a system I haven't seen anybody do right in 20 years, and I know somebody stopped keeping it up about 3 years ago. She let that sit 3 years, the number that meant something, and she watched him hear it. I know your genetics are the reason a buyer out of Billings drove all the way here last fall to look at your bulls, and I know he offered you a price, and you turned him down because you didn't understand what he was really offering. I know your problem isn't that this ranch is worthless, Mr. Washington. Your problem is that it's worth a great deal, and you are the only person in the whole county who hasn't figured that out. The wind moved across the yard. Somewhere in the pens, the injured heifer shifted her weight. Why? Caleb said. Just the one word. Why would you drive back out here to tell me that? You don't know me. Emily Hartwell was quiet a moment, and when she answered, she didn't answer the question he'd asked. She answered a different one, the real one, the one underneath. Because I watched you this morning, she said. I was parked down the county road at 7, working up the courage to come tell you this, and I watched you put your kid on the bus. And then I watched you go down into that draw and drag a bleeding animal up a hill by yourself. And then I watched you kneel in the mud with your hands cut open and make a phone call I could tell you hated making. She stopped. Her voice, when it came back, was lower. I've buried enough of my own that I know what it looks like when a person is carrying something too big for one body. And I know what it looks like when they've decided nobody's coming to help. You've got that look. My husband had that look. I didn't see it in time. She held his eyes. So, call it a stranger butting in. Call it whatever you want. I couldn't drive away from it twice. Caleb stood very still. For 3 years he'd been the strong one. The one who fixed it, carried it, took it on the chin, and never once let his daughter see the size of what was pressing down on him. For 3 years he'd built a wall around that brick by brick, so high and so tight that not his brother, not his neighbors, not the dock, not the bank, nobody had gotten close enough to see the man behind it, and a stranger had parked on the county road for 1 hour and seen straight through the whole thing. He hated it. And he needed it, and the two things fought in him so hard he couldn't speak. I don't need saving. He got out finally. I didn't say you did. Emily Hartwell almost smiled. You need help. Those are different words. Only a certain kind of man mixes them up. She looked out at the land again, at all 600 acres of it, lit up gold in the low morning sun. Too much of it, always too much of it for one man. And she said it quietly, half to herself, the way a person says a thing they've already decided. Your ranch is too big for one person. Caleb turned toward her braced because he'd heard that exact sentence out of Sterling's mouth 2 days ago, and out of the bank's mouth and out of his own head at 3 a.m. for 3 years running. Too big, too much, give it up, you can't. He'd heard those words as an ending every single time. But Emily Hartwell wasn't finished. She looked back at him, and she finished it different than anyone ever had. "So let me stay," she said. "Let me help you take care of it. Let me help you carry the thing you've been hiding from everyone in this county, including yourself." And Caleb Washington, who had said no to the bank, no to his brother, no to Sterling, no to every hand that had reached toward him in 3 long years. Caleb Washington stood in his own front yard with his cut hands hanging at his sides, and for the first time could not for the life of him find the word. "I don't know you," Caleb said. It was the only wall he had left. "You don't," Emily agreed. "That's fair." "I don't take charity. I'm not offering charity. I'm the best appraiser in 3 counties, and I'm currently unemployed, as of about 4 hours ago, when I told my supervisor exactly what I think of what the bank's doing to you, and he told me to clean out my desk." She said it flat, no drama, like she was reading it off a receipt. "So I've got time, and I've got a skill set that's worth money which I am offering you for free, which before you say the word charity again, I'm doing, because helping you claw this back is the first thing that's made sense to me in a year. That's not charity, Mr. Washington. That's a woman needing something worth doing. You'd be doing me a favor letting me." Caleb almost laughed. He didn't, but it was close, and it surprised him that it was close because he hadn't been close to a laugh in a while. "You got fired," he said. "Over my ranch." "I quit. There's a difference. Only a certain kind of woman mixes those up." She threw his own rhythm back at him, and this time he did almost smile, and she caught it, and something in the air between them eased by a single degree. The screen door banged. Nia had come home. Caleb hadn't even registered the bus. She stood on the porch with her backpack still on, looking at the strange truck and the strange woman taking her time about it, the way she took her time about everything. "Who are you?" Nia said. Not rude, just direct. "A Washington." Emily turned to her, and her whole manner changed, not softer exactly, but truer, the guard coming down. "I'm Emily," she said. "I know about cows. Your dad's got a heifer down in that pen with a bad leg. You know the one." Nia's eyes went sharp with interest. "The brown one, Buttercup. You named her Buttercup. She's got a mean streak. It's a joke." Emily did laugh at that, a real one, quick and surprised. "That is a good joke," she said. "That is a genuinely good joke." And Nia, who did not hand out approval to strangers who had looked at Marcus Sterling like a barn cat, looks at a coyote, looked at Emily Hartwell for a long, careful second, and then decided something the way her mother used to decide things, planting her feet. "Do you want to see her?" Nia asked. "Buttercup? Her leg's real bad. Daddy said the vet had to give her a bunch of stitches." And Emily looked at Caleb, not asking permission exactly, but leaving the door open for him to close it. Leaving him the choice, Caleb stood there between the two of them. Between a stranger who'd seen through him in an hour, and a daughter who just for the first time in longer than he could remember sounded like a kid, light easy, showing off a cow with a mean streak to somebody new. He heard Sterling's voice in his head. "Kids remember the losing. They carry it." And he heard his father's voice older and further back. "A Washington never begs. But a smart man knows the difference between begging and building." "Yeah," Caleb said. His voice came out rough. He cleared it. "Yeah, show her Buttercup." He looked at Emily. "You want to see the operation? Fine. You see the operation. That's all this is. You tell me what you think it's worth, and then we'll talk about whether I believe you." "That's all I'm asking," Emily said. "I mean it. That's all it is. I heard you the first time, Mr. Washington." "Caleb." He didn't know why he said it. It just came out. "It's Caleb." Emily Hartwell nodded once like she was accepting something bigger than a name, and maybe she was. "Caleb," she said. And Nia was already halfway to the pens, calling back over her shoulder for Emily to hurry up. and Emily went walking beside an 8-year-old across a ranch that was 72 hours from being lost. And Caleb stood alone in his yard and watched the two of them go. His hands had stopped bleeding. He hadn't noticed when. He looked down at them. Cracked knuckles, calluses on top of calluses. The hands of a man who'd spent 3 years holding a whole world up by himself and telling everyone, especially himself, that he had it under control. Then he looked back up at the woman crouching by the pen with his daughter pointing at a bad leg, saying something that made Nia laugh out loud, that clear high sound he'd been afraid he'd never really hear again. He didn't trust her. He didn't trust anybody. 3 years and 101 years of Washington's had taught him that trusting people was how you ended up standing alone in a hospital hallway, or standing alone in a driveway, watching everything you loved get carried off in the back of a clean black SUV. But he stood there anyway. He didn't chase her off. He didn't turn the truck around. He stood in his own yard with the bank's letter still folded in his back pocket, and 72 hours running down like water. And he let a stranger walk into the middle of his ruined life, and he could not have told you if you'd asked him right then whether he'd just made the smartest decision of his life or the last mistake he'd ever get to make. He only knew one thing for certain, and it scared him worse than the letter, worse than Sterling, worse than the number with all its zeros. For the first time in 3 years, standing in that yard, watching that woman and that little girl Caleb Washington did not feel alone, and he had absolutely no idea what to do with that. Emily Hartwell spent 40 minutes crouched beside that pen, and by the end of it, Caleb understood that she hadn't been exaggerating about one single thing. Who bred her? Emily said. She wasn't looking at the leg anymore. She'd moved past the leg. She had Buttercup's jaw in her hand, turning the animal's head, running a thumb along the line of her neck, and she was frowning the way a person frowns at a thing that doesn't add up. My father. Off of what bull? I'd have to check the book. Check the book, Emily said. Because this animal has no business being in a pen full of commercial cattle. Look at the depth on her. Look at that top line. Somebody built her on purpose off a program, and whoever it was knew exactly what they were doing. She stood up, wiped her hands on her jeans, and looked at Caleb like she was waiting for him to catch up to something. You've been feeding a registered animal like she's hamburger. How many more like her you got out there? Caleb didn't answer right away. Nia answered for him. There's a whole bunch that look like her, Nia said. Down in the far pasture. Daddy calls them the good ones. Emily's head turned slow. The good ones. That's just what I call them, Caleb said. They came off my father's line. He kept them separate. I never had the... He stopped. He'd been about to say time. He'd been about to say the truth, which was that for 3 years he had run this ranch on the last fumes of his father's work, and never once had the hours in a day to understand what he was actually sitting on. He shut his mouth on it. I kept them separate because he kept them separate, that's all. Show me. They're 1.5 miles out. I've got boots on. Emily was already walking toward her truck. You drive or I drive. And that was how 71 hours before First Cattleman's Bank intended to take his ranch. Caleb Washington found himself bouncing across his own back pasture in a stranger's muddy truck, with his daughter squeezed in the middle, pointing out a herd of cattle. He'd been too tired and too alone to see clearly for 3 years. Emily stopped the truck at the fence. She got out. She didn't say anything for a long time. She just stood at the wire and looked at them, 30-some head strung out across the good grass, the drought-proof grass, the low ground his father had known to save, and Caleb watched her face, and her face did something he didn't expect. Her eyes filled up. Ma'am, he said. Emily. Emily, you all right? She wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist, quick, almost angry at herself for it. Yeah, she said. Yeah, She shook her head. You don't see it anymore. When you've been in this business long enough, you stop seeing anything but the number. And then once in a great while you drive up on something like this and you remember why anybody ever wanted the land in the first place. She turned to him, and her voice was steady again, but there was heat under it now, and the heat was for him. Caleb, I need you to hear me, and I need you to not be proud for about 90 seconds. Can you do that? And you do? Say it. That bank appraised your entire operation at $310,000. Land, buildings, equipment, livestock, all of it. 310. She jerked her chin at the herd. The cattle standing in front of us right now, just the good ones, are worth more than that. By themselves. Without an acre of dirt under them. Naya looked up at her father. Caleb had gone very still. That's not possible, he said. It's not just possible, it's documented. I ran your father's herd numbers before I ever drove out here because something about the file didn't sit right. Your daddy registered animals with the association up until about... She paused, and again she gave him the number gently. About 3 years ago. And then the registration stopped. But the genetics didn't stop, Caleb. You kept breeding the good ones to the good ones because that's what he taught you, even though you didn't know what you had. You've got 3 years of unregistered, unrecorded, unpapered animals down here that are worth a fortune to the right buyer and worth nothing to a bank that only knows how to count heads. She let that land. Sterling knows. That's why he wants it fast and cheap and quiet. He is not trying to buy your land. He's trying to buy your father's 40 years of work for the price of a used tractor, and he's counting on you being too buried to notice before the clock runs out. Caleb turned away from her. He put both hands on the fence rail, and he looked out at those animals. His father's animals, the good ones. And something was moving in his chest that he couldn't name and didn't like, because it felt dangerously close to hope. And hope was a thing Caleb Washington had learned to distrust, more than any other feeling a man could have. Even if that's true, he said without turning around, even if every word of that is true. I've got 71 hours and a $189,000 note. You can't sell 30 head of cattle in 71 hours. Not right. Not for what they're worth. You'd be dumping them at the sale barn for pennies same as Sterling, and then I've sold my father's whole life to make one bank payment, and I've got nothing left to run this place with anyway. He shook his head. You drove out here to show me I'm sitting on a treasure I don't have time to dig up. That's not hope, Emily. That's just a crueler way to lose. Emily came and stood at the rail beside him, not touching, just there. You're right, she said. You can't sell them in 71 hours. So you don't sell them. She said it like it was obvious. You use them. Use them, how? Collateral. Emily turned so she was facing him, one elbow on the rail. Caleb, a man with a documented appraisable herd, worth $300,000, does not have a debt problem. He has a paperwork problem. The bank called your note because on paper, you're a failing operation with no way to pay. But if I can prove with an independent appraisal, with association records, with a buyer's letter of intent in hand, that your assets are worth 4 times what they think, then you're not a man begging for mercy anymore. You're a man they've undervalued, and undervaluing collateral. Before a forced auction is the kind of thing that gets banks sued. Her eyes were bright now, sharp, and Caleb realized he was looking at somebody who was good at this, really good, the way he was good with animals, and his father had been good with grass. You don't need $189,000 in 71 hours. You need to change the fight. Right now, they think they're foreclosing on a poor man. I want to make them understand they're about to steal from a rich one on the record, in writing in front of a judge, if it comes to it. Banks fold fast when the story stops being, we helped a failing farmer, and starts being, we tried to rob a man in default of grief. So, Caleb stared at her. In default of grief, he repeated. Emily's face changed. She'd said it without thinking, and now she wished she hadn't. He could see it. That's just a phrase, she said. Legal thing. Means a man who fell behind because of a death in the family, not because of mismanagement. Courts treat it different. She looked away, out at the cattle. It's just a phrase. But it wasn't just a phrase, and they both knew it wasn't. And Nia was standing right there between them, looking up from one adult to the other with those measuring eyes, and Caleb decided the conversation was over. We're burning daylight, he said. Get in the truck, both of you. They worked until dark. That was the thing Caleb hadn't expected, that she would actually work. He'd braced himself for a consultant, a talker, somebody who'd stand at the fence with a clipboard and bill him for opinions. Instead, Emily Hartwell rolled up her sleeves in the failing light and helped him move the injured heifer to a dry pen, and when he went to lift the water trough, she'd already grabbed the other end without being asked. And when the old barn light shorted out, the way it had been shorting out for a month, she found the problem in the panel in about 4 minutes and had it holding with a wire nut before he'd even found the flashlight. "You do electrical too," Caleb said. "I do whatever the ranch I grew up on needed doing," Emily said, wiping her hands. Which was everything. Nobody was coming to do it for us. She said it lightly, but there was a whole life in that sentence, and Caleb heard it, and he didn't ask because he understood that some sentences were doors you didn't walk through the first day. Nia had fallen asleep on a hay bale by 7 worn-out thumb near her mouth, the way it got when she was really under. Caleb went to pick her up. "She likes you," he said quiet so as not to wake her. "That's not a small thing. She doesn't like people." "She likes anybody who takes cows seriously," Emily said. "No." Caleb hitched Nia up onto his shoulder. She weighed nothing. She weighed everything. "She doesn't. Since her mother, she doesn't. She looks at people the way you'd size up a horse you're not sure is broke. She looked at that man from the development company this morning like she was deciding whether to bite him." He met Emily's eyes over the top of his sleeping daughter's head. "She didn't look at you like that. I noticed. I notice everything about her. That's the whole job now, and I'm telling you she didn't look at you like that." Emily didn't say anything, but something moved across her face, and for just a second, Caleb saw underneath it, saw whatever it was she was carrying. The buried thing, the "my husband had that look" thing, and then she folded it back up and put it away. "You should get her to bed," Emily said. "Yeah." He didn't move. "You got a place to stay?" "I'll drive back to town." "Town's an hour." "I know how far town is, Caleb. I've been driving out here for 6 weeks. There's a room, off the barn. My father built it for a hand who never came." He said it fast before he could stop himself, and then wished he could take it back, and then didn't, because that was the truth of it. Half of him wanted her gone off his land and out of his business, and the other half, the tired half that had watched his daughter laugh out loud today for the first time in months, did not want to watch that muddy truck disappear down the county road and take all of it with her. It's nothing fancy. Cot and a heater. But it beats 2 hours of driving for a woman who quit her job over my cows this morning. Emily looked at him a long moment. "That an offer of charity, Mr. Washington," she said. And there was the faintest edge of the smile from that morning throwing his own word back at him a second time. "It's a bed," Caleb said. "Take it or don't." "I'll take it," Emily said. "Thank you." He should have slept. He didn't. He lay in the dark, listening to the refrigerator die by inches downstairs, and he ran the numbers Emily had put in front of him over and over, the way you run your tongue over a broken tooth. 300,000 in cattle. A paperwork problem, not a debt problem. Change the fight. He wanted to believe it. That was the danger of it. He wanted to believe it so badly that he made himself get up at 2 in the morning and stand at Nia's door and watch her sleep for a while, just to remind himself what happened to a man who let himself want things. You wanted a wife to get better and she didn't. You wanted a ranch to turn around and it didn't. You wanted, and the wanting was just a longer walk to the same cliff. At 5 he gave up and went down to start the coffee, and the light was already on in the barn. Emily was up. Of course she was up. She had a lantern going, and his father's old herd book open on a hay bale, and about 6 years of association paperwork spread out around her, and she was making notes on a legal pad in a fast, hard hand, and she'd been at it from the look of the coffee thermos beside her since well before Caleb ever stirred. "You sleep at all?" Caleb said. "Little bit." She didn't look up. "Caleb, come here. I need you to confirm some of these before I build the appraisal, because if I put my name on a number I can't back up, we lose the whole thing the second their lawyer touches it." She patted the bale beside her. "Sit. This is the good part." He sat. And for 2 hours, as the sun came up over the ranch, Emily Hartwell walked him through his own inheritance, through 40 years of his father's careful invisible work, through a program of breeding decisions his old man had kept in his head and in a book, and never once explained to his son, because his son had run off to the army at 18 and only come back at 31 with a wife and a baby, and no time left to learn it before the old man died. Caleb sat on a hay bale and learned at last what his father had built. And he had to keep stopping and looking away and clearing his throat, because it turned out you could grieve a man twice, once when you buried him, and once more years later when a stranger finally showed you what he'd left behind. He was smart, Caleb said at one point. His voice wasn't steady. I always knew he was smart. I never knew he was this. He couldn't finish. He was brilliant, Emily said simply. You come from brilliant people, Caleb. That's not a small thing to hand a kid. She glanced toward the house where Naya was surely stirring by now. You should tell her that, about her great-granddaddy. Kids ought to know what they come from. How do you know so much about it? Caleb said. The genetics, the programs, that's not appraiser stuff. That's a lifetime of stuff. Emily was quiet. I told you I grew up on a ranch, she said finally. You did. We lost it. She said it flat, the way she said everything that cost her sanding all the feeling off it so it could get out of her mouth. 6 years ago, my husband and I ran it after my folks passed. We were good at it. We were so good at it, Caleb, and then he got sick and the medical bills, you know how it goes. You've been close enough to it to know exactly how it goes, and we borrowed against the ranch to keep him alive. And it didn't keep him alive, and then I couldn't make the payments alone. And a man in a nice suit came out to our gate one morning and told me my ranch was too big for one person. She looked up at him, then straight on, and Caleb understood at last why she'd whispered those exact words in his yard yesterday and why they'd come out of her like a wound. So I let it go. I was too tired to fight, and there was nobody left to fight beside me, and I let it go for pennies to a man exactly like Sterling. And then I took the only job I could get, which was learning to be the person who does the paperwork on the next family's worst day. Her jaw tightened. I've appraised 40 ranches in 4 years, Caleb. 40 families getting robbed the way I got robbed. And I did the paperwork on every single one, and I told myself somebody was going to do it anyway, so it might as well be somebody who felt bad about it. She shook her head disgusted, and it was herself she was disgusted with. And then I drove out here, and I watched you drag Buttercup up that hill, and I thought, no, not this one. This one I'm not doing the paperwork on. This one I'm standing on the other side of the fence. She wiped her eyes again, that same quick, angry motion. So that's your answer. That's how I know so much. I know so much because I lost everything I loved to men who count heads instead of seeing them. And I have spent 4 years too much of a coward to do anything about it, but write it down. Caleb didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, You're not doing my paperwork. Emily looked at him. I mean it, Caleb said. Whatever this turns into, however it ends, you're not on the other side of any fence from me. You hear? You quit your job over my cows. You slept in a barn. You're sitting here at 7 in the morning showing me who my own father was. He put his rough hand flat on the herd book on 40 years of his family. You're not doing my paperwork, Emily. You're doing ours. It was the first time either of them had said a word like that. Ours. It sat there in the barn between them, and neither one knew what to do with it, and mercifully they didn't have to, because the screen door banged up at the house, and a small voice hollered across the yard. Daddy, there's a car! There's a black car coming up the road. Sterling didn't come alone this time. That was how Caleb knew the game had changed. Behind the black SUV came a second vehicle, a sedan, a lawyer sedan, and out of it stepped a thin man in glasses carrying a briefcase, and behind him a woman with a camera, and Caleb's stomach dropped because he'd been in enough trouble in his life to know that when a man brings a lawyer and a photographer to your gate at 7:30 in the morning, he has already decided how the story ends, and he's just come to collect the pictures. Mr. Washington, Sterling called all warmth, all daylight. I brought some folks. Hope that's all right. It's not, Caleb said. This is Mr. Voss, my attorney, and Miss Reyes is going to take some photographs of the property condition for the file. Purely routine. The banks asked for a documentation of condition ahead of nothing, Emily said. She'd come up out of the barn behind Caleb, and the moment Sterling saw her, something flickered across his smooth face, surprise quickly buried. But Caleb caught it, and it told him everything. Sterling knew her. Sterling knew exactly who she was. Ms. Hartwell, Sterling said carefully. I didn't expect to see you here. Aren't you? A small pause. A small knife. Aren't you employed by the very institution I'm working with? Seems like a conflict, you standing on the debtor's side of the fence. I was employed by them until about 11:15 yesterday morning, Emily said. So there's no conflict, there's just me. And Mr. Voss, before your photographer takes one picture of this man's property, you're going to want to explain to your client that you're about to document the condition of assets that were materially undervalued in the foreclosure appraisal, which is going to make some very interesting reading when we file to halt the sale. She smiled at the lawyer, and it was not a warm smile. You are Mr. Voss. Yes, you do the bank's foreclosure work. Then you already know exactly what an appraiser standing on this side of the fence means. It means somebody's going to prove the numbers wrong. And I'm somebody. I'm the somebody who wrote the first number, in fact. So you and I are going to have a very bad afternoon in front of a judge if that camera comes off her shoulder. The lawyer Voss looked at Sterling, and in that look, that one flick of the eyes from the hired lawyer to the man who was paying him, Caleb saw the first crack. Because Voss was calculating now. Voss hadn't signed up for a fight. Voss had signed up for a clean foreclosure on a broke rancher. And instead, there was a licensed appraiser standing in the yard promising to make him famous in the wrong way. Marcus, Voss said quietly. A word. In a minute. Now I think. Sterling's jaw worked just once, the same tick Caleb himself had the tell of a man not used to the ground shifting under him. Then he smoothed it over, and he turned back to Caleb with the daylight smile cranked all the way up. You've made an interesting choice in allies, Mr. Washington, Sterling said. Ms. Hartwell here has a real talent for grand gestures. I'd just gently point out that the last ranch she got emotional about her own, she lost anyway. All the passion in the world, all the paperwork, and she still walked off it with nothing. He let his eyes rest on Emily, and now the knife came all the way out. I looked into you after you turned in a suspiciously generous appraisal on Monday. You're not a crusader, Ms. Hartwell. You're a woman who couldn't save her own place, and has been chasing the feeling ever since. And I understand that. I do. But you're about to teach this man to hope, and then he's going to lose exactly the same way you did, and you'll have made it worse because at least when it happened to you, you didn't have a child watching. It got very quiet in the yard. Nia had come down off the porch. She was standing beside her father's leg now, one small hand fisted in the fabric of his jeans, looking up at the man in the gray suit, who was making the grown-up who took cows seriously go pale and rigid. And Caleb. Caleb, who had held his temper through every insult for 3 years, who had swallowed the bank and the brother and the doc and all of it, who had learned that a black man in Montana, who lost his temper at a man in a suit, lost a great deal more than his temper. Caleb took one step forward. Just one. And he said very low in a voice Nia had never heard him use, "You don't talk to her? You came to talk to me? You talk to me. But you say one more word to that woman, or you look at my daughter one more time, and I will forget everything my father spent his whole life teaching me about men like you." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. You understand me. You brought a lawyer and a camera to my gate to take pictures of a family on the worst week of their lives, so you could feel good about the price you're paying. I know exactly what you are. I've known men like you my whole life. And the only thing you got wrong, Sterling, the only thing is, you looked at me tired and figured tired was the same as beat. He shook his head slow. It ain't the same. You'll find that out. For a moment nobody moved. Then Emily's hand landed on Caleb's arm. Light. Just enough. He's baiting you, she said quietly for him alone. That's all this is. He wants you to swing so there's a picture of it. Don't give him the picture. And Caleb looked down at her hand on his arm and then up at the photographer whose camera had in fact come halfway to her eye, waiting hungry, and he understood. He stepped back. He unclenched his hands. He put one arm around his daughter and drew her in against his hip. "Get off my land," he said, calm now, cold now. "You've got no paper that lets you stand here yet, and Mr. Voss knows it. Come back with a sheriff, or don't come back at all." Voss was already touching Sterling's elbow, already turning him toward the cars. "Marcus, we're leaving." And to his credit, or his self-interest, Voss got them moving, the photographer lowering her camera with a look of frank disappointment. The lawyer's face closed, and worried Sterling, last of all, walking backward a few steps so he could keep his eyes on Caleb. 66 hours, Mr. Washington. Sterling called, getting into the SUV. "The clock doesn't care how brave you are. Ask Miss Hartwell. She was brave too." The doors shut. The vehicles pulled out. And this time, Caleb didn't watch the dust settle. This time, he turned immediately to Emily, and what he saw on her face stopped him cold. She was shaking, not from fear. From fury, and from something older and worse than fury, from the particular grief of a person who has just heard the truest, cruelest version of their own story spoken out loud by an enemy in front of a child. "Emily." "He's not wrong," she said. Her voice was thin. "That's the thing, Caleb. He's not wrong. I did lose it. All the paperwork in the world, and I still lost it. What if I'm about to do exactly what he said? What if I teach you and Naya to hope, and then—" "Hey!" Caleb stepped in front of her. He put himself between Emily Hartwell and the empty road where the black car had gone the same way he'd put himself between Naya and every hard thing for 3 years. "Look at me. Not at the road. At me." He waited until she did. "You know what the difference is between your ranch and mine? Don't." "The difference," Caleb said, "is that when they came for yours, you were standing at that gate by yourself. You said it. Nobody left to fight beside you." He held her eyes. "That's the whole difference. That's the only difference. It's not the paperwork, and it's not the cattle, and it's not the number. It's that you were alone, and I'm not." He looked down at Nia, still fisted into his jeans, still watching. "We're not, are we, baby?" "No," Nia said fiercely, though Caleb doubted she understood half of it. "We're not." And Emily Hartwell, who had driven out to this ranch to do a man a favor, who had told herself she was the strong one, the one with the skill and the plan, the one doing the helping. Emily Hartwell put her hand over her mouth and turned away so the child wouldn't see her face come apart. And Caleb didn't reach for her because he understood better than most that some people can't be touched when they're breaking, that the kindest thing is to simply not leave. So he didn't leave. He stood there 2 feet off her shoulder, and he let her have her minute, and when she'd got herself back, he pretended he hadn't seen any of it, because that was a kindness too. "All right," Emily said finally, wiping her face for the last time that morning. Her voice had come back hard. "All right. If he's bringing a lawyer, we bring a lawyer. If he's building a file, we build a bigger one. Caleb, I need 3 things from you today, and I need them fast." "Name 'em." "I need every scrap of paper your father ever kept. Registrations, receipts, breeding records, the whole book, all of it. Even the stuff you think is junk. I need the number of that buyer out of Billings who came to look at your bulls last fall, the one you turned down. And I need you to trust me for about the next 60 hours, even when it looks like it's not working, because it's going to look like it's not working. That's how these things go, and the second you decide it's not working is the second Sterling wins." She stuck out her hand, not to shake on it exactly, more like she was daring him. "Can you do that? Can you trust a stranger who's already lost one of these fights for 60 hours? Caleb looked at her hand, and here was the thing that had scared him at 2 in the morning, the thing that had kept him awake, the thing he'd built 3 years of wall against. Trusting somebody was how you got hurt. Trusting somebody was how you ended up in a hospital hallway. Trusting somebody was the black car and the empty road and the number with all its zeros. He knew that. It was the truest thing he knew. He took her hand anyway. 60 hours, he said. But I want the buyer's letter in writing before I sign anything. And if you're wrong about the cattle, we do it my way after that. No arguing. If I'm wrong about the cattle, I'll drive to Billings and buy you a new herd myself, Emily said. Deal. Deal. Nia looked up at the two adults, shaking hands over her head. And in the flat morning light, she did the thing her mother used to do. She planted her feet, and she made a decision, and she announced it to the whole ranch in the voice of an 8-year-old who has been listening to every single word. Are you going to live in the barn forever? Nia asked Emily. Or are you going to come inside the house? And Caleb opened his mouth to say something about that, to slow it down, to put the wall back up, and found he had nothing. Found the wall wasn't there. Found that somewhere in the last 24 hours, without deciding to, without permission, he had let a stranger walk all the way inside the thing he'd sworn no one would ever get inside again. Nia, he managed. It's a real reasonable question, Emily said, and there was the ghost of that smile again aimed down at the girl. But I think your daddy and I are going to take that one slow. That okay with you? Slow's fine, Nia said with the enormous patience of a child who has decided how something is going to end and is prepared to wait for the adults to catch up. But it's cold in the barn, just so you know. I'll keep that in mind, Emily said gravely, and Caleb Washington stood in his yard between the two of them, 66 hours from losing everything his family had built in 101 years, with a stranger's promise in his hand, and his father's whole life waiting in a book in the barn, and his daughter grinning up at both of them, and he did the last thing in the world he'd have believed himself capable of doing on a morning like this one. He laughed. It came up out of him rough and surprised the way the almost laugh had the day before, except this time it made it all the way out. And Nia startled at the sound of it. She couldn't remember. Caleb realized the last time she'd heard it. And then she grinned wider, delighted, and grabbed Emily's hand and started tugging her toward the house, and the herd book, and the 66 hours, and whatever came after all of it, the whole uncertain rest of it. Come on, Nia said. I'll show you where Daddy keeps the good coffee. I already found the good coffee, Emily said. I've been up since 4. Then I'll show you where he keeps the better coffee, Nia said, for special. And she hauled the both of them up the porch steps and into the house, and the screen door banged behind the three of them. And for the length of one breakfast at least, the ranch that was too big for one man held all of them just fine. The better coffee lasted exactly as long as it took Emily to find the buyer's number, and then breakfast was over, and the work began in earnest. Daryl Kettering. She read off the back of a feed store receipt Caleb had scrawled the name on 8 months ago and forgotten. This is who came to look at your bulls. That's him. Drove down from Billings last fall. Spent about 2 hours walking my far pasture and then offered me— Caleb stopped. He offered me a number I thought was crazy. I figured he was trying to cheat me the other direction somehow. Soften me up. So I turned him down flat, and he left, and I never called him back. Emily set the receipt down very slowly. What number, Caleb? For 4 bulls, he said. Caleb rubbed the back of his neck, embarrassed now, hearing it out loud in the light of everything she'd shown him. He said 32,000 for 4 animals. I thought he was running a game on me. Who pays $8,000 for a bull? People who understand what your father built, Emily said. That's who. Caleb, that wasn't a game. That was a serious cattleman making you a real offer, and you were so buried and so used to getting cheated that you couldn't tell the difference between a robbery and a rescue anymore. She was already dialing. That's what 3 years alone does to a person. It breaks the part of you that can tell who's lying. Everybody starts looking like Sterling. She put the phone to her ear. Let's find out if he's still interested. He was still interested. Caleb could tell from across the kitchen, from the way Emily's shoulders came down, from the way her pen started moving on the legal pad, from the little sound she made low in her throat, that meant a thing was going right. She talked to Daryl Kettering for 20 minutes. She used words Caleb half understood, and words he didn't understand at all. And she said his father's name, and she said the association numbers. She'd stayed up until 4 in the morning pulling. And twice she looked up at Caleb with an expression that was getting harder and harder for him to keep his hope out of. She hung up. She set the phone down. She looked at him. Say it, Caleb said. Whatever it is, just say it. He's not interested in 4 bulls anymore, Emily said. Caleb's stomach dropped. Then why are you smiling? Because he's interested in the whole program. She stood up. She couldn't sit still. Caleb, he remembered your father. He remembered your father from 20 years ago, from association meetings, from a bull your daddy sold his father when Daryl was a teenager. When I told him the Washington line was still going, that you'd kept breeding the good ones, even without papers. He got quiet on the phone, the way I got quiet at the fence yesterday. He said, she stopped, and there was a shine in her eyes again, but a good one this time. He said he thought that blood was gone. He said he'd looked for it. He said there were maybe 3 or 4 programs like your father's left in the whole northern range, and he thought yours had died with the old man. She pressed her hand flat to the table. He wants to come Thursday. He wants to bring a partner and a trailer and a checkbook, and he wants first refusal on the entire genetic line, not the beef. The breeding, which is a completely different animal financially than selling 30 head at the sale barn. None. Caleb sat down. He had to. How different, he said. I'm not going to say a number until I see him walk the pasture, Emily said, because I've been burned promising numbers and I won't do it to you. But Caleb, she crouched down so she was level with him at the table the way he crouched down for Naya. It's enough. Whatever the exact figure it is, enough to pay off that note 4 times over and have money left to actually run this place instead of just bleeding it. That's not hope talking. That's a licensed appraiser and a real buyer and 40 years of your father's work. It's real. Thursday, Caleb said. Thursday morning. The sale's Friday. The bank takes it Friday. Emily's face changed. What? 66 hours, he said. This morning. That puts it Friday. Caleb was doing the math again. The math that was always the same, except this time the numbers had finally moved, and now the clock was the thing that hadn't. If Kettering comes Thursday, and it goes right, when does his money actually hit? Because a check doesn't stop a foreclosure, Emily. A promise doesn't stop a foreclosure. I need cleared funds, or I need the bank to blink, and I need it before Friday, and Thursday to Friday is... He put his face in his hands briefly, then pulled them down, made himself keep looking at it. It's not enough time. It's the same trap. We just found the treasure, and the tide's still coming in. For a long moment, Emily didn't say anything. And then she stood up, and Caleb watched something set in her face. The thing he'd seen the first morning at the gate. The thing that had made a stranger drive back out to a doomed ranch on her own time. Then we don't wait for the money to stop the foreclosure, she said. We use the proof of the money to stop the foreclosure. 2 different fights, remember I told you at the fence. The bank called your note because on paper you can't pay. But the second I can put a signed letter of intent from Daryl Kettering in front of a judge, a documented offer that proves your assets are worth 4 times what they appraised them, this stops being a foreclosure and starts being a bank trying to force a fire sale on a man whose collateral they lowballed. No judge in this state signs off on that. Not once it's on the record. She was pacing now fast, thinking out loud, and Caleb realized he was watching somebody do the thing they were born to do. We file an emergency motion Thursday afternoon. The second Kettering signs the letter. We ask the court to halt the sale on grounds of material undervaluation. We don't need the money by Friday. We need the paper by Friday. And the paper, Caleb, the paper I can get you. You can do that in a day. I've spent 4 years watching lawyers do it to people. I know exactly how it's built because I've handed them the appraisals they built it with. Her jaw tightened. For once, I get to hand the appraisal to the other side. Caleb stood up slowly. You need a lawyer for that. A real one. Court motions. That's not something you and me do at a kitchen table. I know a lawyer. Emily was already looking it up. Woman named Ruth Okafor up in Helena. She used to do exactly this. She used to fight these foreclosures for a legal aid outfit before the funding got cut. She's the reason I know half of what I know. She'll do it. She'll do it for the same reason I quit my job. Emily glanced up at him. Because she's been waiting 4 years for somebody to hand her a fight she can actually win. Ruth Okafor called back at noon and listened for 6 minutes without saying a word, and then she said one thing. "Ms. Hartwell, is the buyer real? Because I can build the prettiest motion in Montana, and it means nothing if that letter of intent falls apart under a bank lawyer's thumb. So I'm going to ask you once plainly, and I want the truth. Is Daryl Kettering going to sign, and is his offer real?" Emily looked across the kitchen at Caleb. "He's driving down Thursday with a trailer and a checkbook," Emily said. "That's how real." "Then get me everything," Ruth Okafor said. "Every registration the association records your appraisal, and the second Kettering signs a scanned copy in my inbox. I'll have the motion drafted and ready to file the moment that paper hits. We file Thursday afternoon, we ask for an emergency stay, and we make the bank explain to a judge why they tried to foreclose Friday on a man whose herd is worth $250,000. A pause. "And Emily, when this is over, you and I are going to have a conversation about the other 39 families. But first this one. First, we win one." She hung up. Emily set the phone down and let out a long breath, and Caleb saw that her hands weren't quite steady. And he understood that under all her certainty, she was as scared as he was, that she was doing this in spite of the fear. Not the absence of it, which he was beginning to understand, was the only kind of brave there actually was. "It's gonna work," Caleb said. It came out as much a question as a statement. "It's got a real chance," Emily said, "which is more than you had yesterday morning." She rubbed her eyes. "But Caleb, listen to me, because I need you ready for this. Sterling is not going to sit still. The second he catches wind that we've got a buyer and a lawyer, and that man has ears in every office in this county, he is going to try to blow it up before Thursday. He can't afford to let Kettering sign. If Kettering signs, Sterling's whole play is dead, because the whole play was buying a fortune for the price of a used tractor. He's going to come at us. I don't know how yet, but he's going to come, and it's going to be dirty, and it's going to be soon." She was right. He came that night. He didn't come himself. That was the first lesson Caleb learned about how a man like Sterling fights. When the fight gets real, he never puts his own hands on it. The phone rang at 8:40 that evening after Nia was down, and Caleb answered it, and a voice he didn't know asked for Emily Hartwell by name. Caleb held the phone out. "It's for you." "Man won't say who." Emily took it. Caleb watched her face as she listened, and he watched it go from puzzled to cold, to something close to sick, and she didn't say anything for almost a minute except, "I'm listening." And then, at the very end, very quietly, "I understand you perfectly." And then she hung up. "Emily." She set the phone down on the table with great care, like it might go off. "That was a man from the state licensing board," she said. Her voice had gone flat and careful. "Or he says he's from the licensing board. He informed me that a complaint has been filed against my appraiser's license. Filed today. He said the complaint alleges that I submitted a fraudulently inflated appraisal on a property I have a personal financial interest in, that I'm conspiring with the owner to defraud a lender." She looked up at Caleb. "He said if I withdraw the appraisal and cease involvement with the Washington property by tomorrow morning, the complaint gets dropped and my license stays clean. If I don't," she exhaled, "there's a hearing. And a hearing means my license is suspended pending review, which means I can't sign anything, which means the appraisal Ruth needs for the motion is worthless, because it'd be filed by an appraiser under active investigation." Caleb sat down slowly across from her. "He's not from the licensing board," Caleb said. "No. He's Sterling's. Has to be. The timing's too perfect." Emily pressed her fingers to her temples. "But it doesn't matter whether he's real, Caleb. That's the ugly part. If Sterling actually filed that complaint, and he's got the lawyer and the money to file anything he wants, then it's real whether it's true or not. A complaint doesn't have to be true to suspend a license. It just has to exist long enough to run out our clock. He's not trying to win the argument. He's trying to take away my ability to sign a piece of paper for the next 48 hours. And 48 hours is all he needs. Can he do that?" "He just did it." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. God, he's good. He didn't come at you, Caleb. He can't beat you. You've got the cattle, you've got the buyer coming. So he came at the one part of the plan that only works if I'm clean. He's not trying to take your ranch anymore. He's trying to take me. The kitchen was very quiet. And then Caleb did something Emily didn't expect. He didn't get angry. He didn't put his face in his hands. He got up, and he went to the counter, and he poured 2 cups of the coffee that had been sitting on the burner all day, gone bitter and black, and he set one down in front of her, and sat back down with the other. And he wrapped both his cracked hands around it, and looked at her steady. You told me something this morning, Caleb said. You told me the whole difference between your ranch and mine was that you were standing at your gate alone, and I'm not. You remember saying that? Caleb, you said it. So I'm going to say it back to you now because it's your turn to hear it. He leaned forward. You are not standing at this thing alone. He's coming at your license fine. Then he's not just fighting you anymore. He's fighting me too. And Ruth and Kettering, and 101 years of Washingtons, and a little girl upstairs who's already decided you're staying. You hear me? He picked you off, thinking you're still that woman at the gate by herself with nobody to fight beside her. Caleb shook his head slow. He picked wrong. You're not by yourself anymore. Neither one of us is. Emily looked at him across the table, and her eyes filled, and this time she didn't wipe it away angry, and she didn't turn so the child wouldn't see, because the child was asleep, and it was just the 2 of them, and the bitter coffee, and 60 hours on the clock. I'm scared, she said. It cost her to say it. He could see what it cost her. I haven't let myself say that in 6 years. I lost everything last time Caleb and I told myself I'd never care about a piece of dirt that much again. And here I am caring about yours like it's mine, and I'm terrified I'm going to fail you the way I failed. She stopped. She couldn't say the name. Your husband, Caleb said gently. I couldn't save him. All the fight in me, and I couldn't save him. Her voice broke all the way. And I couldn't save the ranch either. And now there's you and there's Nia, and I'm the one who talked you into hoping. And if I lose your license fight and you lose your ranch on Friday, then Sterling was right about me. Then I really am just a woman who couldn't save her own place teaching other people to hope right before they lose. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Can I tell you something my father used to say, he said. Before all this, when I was a kid. Emily nodded, not trusting her voice. He used to say courage isn't a feeling. He said everybody's got the feeling backwards. They think courage is when you're not scared. He said, no, the scared is always there. The scared never leaves. If you wait to stop being scared, you'll wait your whole life. He said courage is just what you call it when you're scared clean through and you do the hard thing anyway. Caleb turned his coffee cup slowly on the table. You drove back out to a doomed ranch scared. You quit your job scared. You called Ruth scared. Every single thing you've done for me and my daughter in 2 days, you did it scared. So don't sit at my table and tell me you're a coward, Emily Hartwell. I've watched a whole lot of brave men in my life, and not one of them had a thing on you. He looked up. You're the bravest person who's stood in this kitchen since my father died. That's the truth. And I don't say things I don't mean. For a long moment neither of them said anything. Then Emily wiped her face once, but slow this time, not angry. And she picked up the bitter coffee and drank some, and she made a face at how bad it was. And Caleb almost smiled, and something in the room shifted and settled, the way it does when 2 people who've been fighting alone their whole lives realize all at once that for the moment at least they're fighting the same thing from the same side. Okay, Emily said, and her voice was steadier. Okay, then let's not let him take my license. She set the cup down. Because here's what Sterling doesn't know. He doesn't know that I spent 4 years learning exactly how these dirty complaints get filed because I watched the bank use them on people. And a complaint filed in bad faith, purely to interfere with a legal proceeding with a foreclosure defense that's not just dirty, Caleb, that's illegal. That's tampering. If we can prove Sterling filed a false licensing complaint specifically to knock me out before the motion that doesn't just save my license. Her eyes were sharpening again, the fear burning off the appraiser coming back. That hands Ruth a weapon, because now the story in front of the judge isn't undervalued collateral anymore. Now it's a developer who lowballed the appraisal, then filed a fraudulent complaint to silence the appraiser who caught him. That's not a foreclosure story anymore. That's a fraud story. And judges do not like being made part of a fraud. Caleb sat very still. "You just turned his own move into our best card," he said slowly. "If we can prove he made it, and that's the catch." Emily was already pulling the legal pad back toward her. "I need proof it came from Sterling. A phone number that traces back to him. Voss's fingerprints on the filing. Something. Because right now all I've got is a threatening phone call from a man who says he's from the licensing board, and a scary man called me isn't evidence." She stopped and looked up, and Caleb watched a thought arrive on her face. Voss. The lawyer. The lawyer looked like he wanted to be 100 miles away this morning, Emily said. "You saw it. The second I said material undervaluation, Voss got cold feet. He pulled Sterling aside. That's a man who signed up for a clean foreclosure and is watching it turn into something that could put his own license at risk. A false complaint scheme tampering with a court proceeding. Voss won't go down for that. Not for Sterling. Not for a commission." She stood up. "If I can get to Voss before the hearing, if I can make him understand that this ship is going down and the only question is whether he's on it, he might hand us Sterling to save himself." She looked at Caleb. "It's a long shot. It's a real long shot. But it's Wednesday night, Kettering comes Thursday, and we file Thursday afternoon. We've got 1 day to turn Sterling's own lawyer against him. How?" "I don't know yet." She almost laughed. "But 24 hours ago I didn't know how to save your ranch either, and here we are." She looked at the clock. It was past 9. "Go to bed, Caleb. Naya's got school, and you've got a buyer coming, and I've got a lawyer to figure out how to flip, and none of us does any of it worth a damn on no sleep. We start at 5. Caleb stood. He carried both bitter coffee cups to the sink. And at the doorway he stopped, and he said without turning around in a low voice, "When it's over, however it goes, you should know I already made up my mind about something." "About what?" "Naya asked you this morning if you were going to live in the barn forever, or come inside." Caleb still didn't turn around. His hand was on the doorframe. "I didn't answer her. I want you to know it wasn't because I didn't have an answer. It was because I wasn't ready to say it out loud yet in front of everybody on the worst week of our lives when it might have just been the drowning talking." He was quiet a second. "I'm still not going to say it yet. Not till the ranch is safe, and I know it's me talking and not the fear. A man shouldn't say a thing that big when he's underwater. It's not fair to anybody." Now he turned, and he looked at her across the dark kitchen. "But I wanted you to know there's an answer coming, Emily. When the water goes down, there's an answer coming." And he went up the stairs to bed before she could say anything back, because he'd used up every ounce of brave he had, and some things a man has to say, and then leave the room before his courage fails him. Emily Hartwell sat alone at the kitchen table for a long time after that. In the house that wasn't hers, on a ranch that might not survive the week, with a licensing complaint hanging over the only career she had left, and a scared little girl asleep upstairs, and a man who'd just told her, in the only way he knew how, that he was falling for her and refusing to say so until he was sure it was the truth and not the drowning. And for the first time in 6 years, 6 years of doing paperwork on other people's ruin, 6 years of telling herself she'd never care about a piece of dirt that much. Again, Emily Hartwell put her head down on the kitchen table of a stranger's ranch and cried, not from grief this time, and not from fear, but because she had somewhere she wanted to stay, and 30-some hours to fight like hell to keep it. They started at 5, and by 5:30 Emily had already figured out how she was going to get to Voss. "I'm not going to him," she said, standing over the kitchen table with a cup of coffee she'd made fresh and strong, no more of yesterday's bitter dregs. "That's the mistake I kept making in my head all night. You don't go to a scared man's office and corner him, he lawyers up, he tells Sterling, and then Sterling knows we're on to the complaint, and he covers his tracks. No, you make the scared man come to you, and you make him think it was his idea." She looked at Caleb over the cup. Ruth called me back at 4:40. She was up too. She's going to file a records request this morning, completely routine, completely legal, asking the licensing board for a copy of the complaint against me and the name of the party who filed it. She's going to CC Voss because Voss is the bank's attorney of record on the foreclosure, and any filing that touches the property has to go to him. A thin smile. Now, if Voss is clean, if he had nothing to do with the complaint, that CC means nothing to him. He files it and forgets it. But if Voss knows the complaint is dirty, if he knows it came from Sterling to interfere with our motion, then that records request is going to land on his desk like a live grenade. Because it means somebody's already pulling the thread. And a man who's watching a fraud unravel around him does one of two things. Runs, Caleb said. Or gets ahead of it, Emily said. Cuts a deal before he's the last one holding the bag. And I'm betting Voss is a get-ahead-of-it man because he's a lawyer, and lawyers survive by being the first one to flip. He pulled Sterling aside in your yard, Caleb. He's already scared. Ruth's records request is just going to be the thing that tells him it's time. She set the coffee down. So we don't chase Voss. We rattle him, and then we wait, and we get Kettering signed, and we see if the lawyer calls before the clock runs out. He called at 11:15. Emily was in the far pasture with Caleb when her phone rang, the two of them walking the good ground, getting the animals grouped for Kettering's visit the next morning, and she looked at the screen and went still. It's a Helena number, she said. Unknown. She looked at Caleb. That's either the licensing board or it's him. Answer it. She answered it. She said, "This is Emily Hartwell." And then she listened, and Caleb watched her face. And this time it didn't go sick the way it had the night before. This time it went sharp and focused the way a coyote's does when the trail turns hot. "I'm listening, Mr. Voss," she said. And then after a while, "No, you're not going to talk in circles at me, and I don't have the time, and neither do you. So let me make this simple because I think you already know all of it." She started walking slow, the phone tight to her ear, and Caleb walked beside her close enough to hear her half of it, his heart going hard. "You filed the foreclosure. Fine, that's your job. But you didn't file the licensing complaint against me. I don't think you'd be that stupid, and I don't think Sterling would trust you to. I think Sterling filed it or had somebody file it, and I think he did it without running it past you first. And I think when that records request landed on your desk this morning, you realized your name is all over a foreclosure that's about to get exposed as fraud, and you had nothing to do with the dirty part, but you're the one whose license is on the building." A pause. "Am I warm, Mr. Voss?" "I'm warm. I can hear it." Caleb watched a man he'd never met crack open on the other end of a phone line 40 miles away. "Here's what I know." Emily went on, and her voice dropped into something almost gentle. The voice of a person offering a drowning man a rope, which was exactly what she was doing. "I know you signed up to foreclose on a rancher who fell behind. Ordinary sad legal. I know you did not sign up to be part of a scheme where your client lowballs an appraisal and then files a false complaint against a licensed professional to interfere with a court proceeding. Because that last part isn't a foreclosure anymore, Mr. Voss. That's tampering. That's fraud. And when it comes apart, and it's coming apart, you got the records request. You know it's coming apart. The question the Bar Association is going to ask isn't whether Sterling did it. Sterling's not a lawyer. They can't touch Sterling the way they can touch you. The question they're going to ask is, what did the attorney of record know, and when did he know it, and why didn't he withdraw? She let it sit. You know that question better than I do. You've probably asked it about somebody else. Silence on the line. Long silence. Caleb could hear his own pulse. "So I'm going to give you something Sterling never would," Emily said. "I'm going to give you a way to be the first one out the door, instead of the last one holding it shut. You give Ruth Okafor a sworn statement who filed the complaint on whose instruction what you knew, and you withdraw as counsel, citing a conflict, and you do it before our motion hearing. And when this is over, you're the lawyer who caught a fraud and reported it, not the lawyer who got caught in one. That's the whole difference, Mr. Voss. It's the only difference that matters to a man in your position. And it closes tomorrow morning because that's when we file, and after we file, you're not a witness anymore, you're a defendant." A pause. "Ruth Okafor, I'll text you her number. You've got till tonight." She hung up. She stood in the middle of the far pasture with the phone in her hand and cattle grazing all around her and Caleb Washington staring at her like she'd just called down lightning. "Did he—" Caleb couldn't finish it. "He didn't say yes," Emily said. Her hand, he noticed, was shaking a little, the adrenaline coming down. "But he didn't hang up on me either. And a man who's going to say no hangs up in the first 10 seconds. A man who stays on the line for 4 minutes while you lay out exactly how he goes to hell." She let out a breath. "That's a man looking for the door. He's going to call Ruth. I don't know it for sure, but I've watched 40 of these, Caleb, and I know what a man sounds like right before he saves himself. He's going to call her." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. "You just took the meanest thing that man did to you," he said slowly. "The thing that had you crying at my kitchen table at 9 o'clock last night, and you turned it into the thing that might save the whole ranch. In 12 hours. We turned it," Emily said. "You reminded me I wasn't at the gate alone. That's the only reason I could pick the phone up." She almost smiled. "Turns out your father was right about the scared. It never left. I just did the hard thing with it sitting right there in my chest the whole time. And out in the middle of the far pasture with 101 years of Washington cattle grazing around them and the clock running down toward Friday." Caleb Washington reached out and took Emily Hartwell's shaking hand in his cracked one. And he held it, and neither of them said a word about it. And neither of them let go for a good long while. Voss called Ruth Okafor at 9:40 that night. Ruth called Emily at 9:52, and Caleb knew before Emily said a word because he watched her sink down into a kitchen chair with her hand over her mouth and her eyes shining, and when she finally pulled the phone away from her ear, she just nodded over and over like she couldn't trust her own voice. "He's giving a statement," she said finally. "Voss, he's withdrawing as counsel first thing tomorrow morning, and he's giving Ruth a sworn affidavit." Sterling instructed the complaint. "Voss has the emails. He kept the emails, Caleb, the man kept the emails, thank God, because a lawyer always keeps the emails." She laughed, and it came out half a sob. "The licensing complaint against me is dead the second Ruth files his statement. Which means my appraisal holds. Which means the motion's real," Caleb said. "Which means the motion's real." She wiped her eyes. "Ruth files tomorrow afternoon. The second Kettering signs. She attaches the letter of intent, she attaches Voss's affidavit, and she walks into court and says, 'Here is a bank trying to force a Friday fire sale on a man whose collateral they undervalued by 300%. And here is the developer who filed a fraudulent complaint to silence the appraiser who caught them, and I move for an emergency stay.'" She shook her head slowly, like she still couldn't quite believe it. "No judge signs off on the sale after that, Caleb. Nobody. Sterling didn't just lose his edge, he handed us the case." Caleb sat down across from her. It was the same table where she'd cried the night before, the same 2 chairs, and the distance between last night and tonight felt like a country. "Tomorrow," he said. "Kettering comes tomorrow morning. Everything hangs on him signing." "Everything hangs on him signing," Emily agreed. "Get some sleep, Caleb. Tomorrow's the day the water goes down or it doesn't." He remembered what he'd said the night before at the doorway about the answer that was coming when the water went down. He saw that she remembered it too. Neither one of them said anything about it. But he stopped at the doorway again, and this time he did turn around, and he looked at her, and he said quietly, "Water's going down tomorrow, Emily." "We'll see," she said. But she was smiling when she said it. Darrell Kettering came at 8 in the morning with a stock trailer, a partner named Hollis, and a checkbook exactly as promised. And he did not say much for the first hour. He walked the far pasture the way Emily had walked it the first day. Slow, quiet, stopping crouching, running his hands along an animal's back, and standing up again with a look on his weathered face that got harder to read the longer he went. Caleb walked beside him and said nothing because Emily had told him to say nothing. "Let the cattle talk," she'd said. "You've spent 3 years apologizing for this place. Don't apologize today. Just let the man look." So Caleb let him look. And Naya, who had refused to go to school, who had planted her feet and announced that this was the most important day in the history of the ranch, and she was not going to spend it doing long division. Naya trailed along behind the men with Buttercup's lead rope in her hand, because the vet had cleared the heifer to walk that morning, and the girl had decided Buttercup ought to be there for the important day too. Kettering stopped at the far fence at the heart of the herd, and he stood there a long time. "Your daddy," he said finally. "James Washington." "Yes, sir. I met him. Long time back. I was maybe 19, come down with my own father to buy a bull off him." Kettering's eyes stayed on the cattle. "Your granddad and my granddad knew each other. Did you know that—" "No, sir, I didn't." "Sold us a bull in." Kettering thought about it. Would have been 89, 90. That bull was the foundation of my whole outfit. Everything I've got up in Billings traces back to a Washington bull my daddy bought off your daddy when Reagan was still president. He turned and looked at Caleb, and his eyes were wet, and he didn't seem to care that they were. "I thought this blood was gone, son. I truly did. I looked for it. When your daddy passed, I called down here twice and never got an answer, and I figured—" He shook his head. "I figured you'd sold off or scattered it. I figured the drought took it. I'd made my peace that the Washington line was finished." He looked back out at the herd. "And here it is, standing in front of me. 3 years passed when I quit looking. You kept it going." He said it almost like an accusation, almost like a prayer. "You didn't even know what you had, and you kept it going anyway." Caleb's throat was too tight to answer. It was Nia who spoke. "Daddy calls them the good ones," she said from behind them, Buttercup's rope in her small fist. Kettering turned and looked down at her, at the girl and the heifer. "Do you know why they're the good ones, little miss?" he asked. "Because great-granddad made them good," Nia said. "And then granddad, and then daddy. Nobody wrote it down, but they kept it going anyway." She lifted her chin the way her mother used to. "Emily says I come from brilliant people. She says I ought to know what I come from. So that's what I come from. The good ones." Darrell Kettering looked at that 8-year-old girl for a long moment. Then he looked at Caleb. Then he took off his hat, which is a thing certain men of a certain age do only at funerals and in the presence of something they've decided to respect. And he held it against his chest, and he said, "Mr. Washington, I came down here prepared to make you an offer on your genetics, and I'm going to make it, and it's going to be a fair one, better than fair, because I've been chasing this blood for 20 years, and I'm not going to insult it by lowballing it now." He put his hat back on. "But I want to say something to you first, man to man, before any money changes hands, because I think you've had a hard run, and I think you need to hear it from somebody who knew your father." He looked Caleb dead in the eye. "Your daddy would be proud of you, son. You kept his life's work alive, through 3 of the worst years this range has seen alone with a child to raise, and you did it without even knowing that's what you were doing. That's not luck, that's blood. You're one of the good ones, too. Now let's go sit at your kitchen table, and I'll write a number that'll make your appraiser lady over there start crying, and then we'll both pretend she didn't." Emily was already crying. She was standing back by the gate where she'd stayed out of it, letting the cattle talk like she'd said, and she was crying openly and unashamed. And when Caleb caught her eye across the pasture, she just nodded at him. Go sit down. This is it. This is the water going down." And Caleb Washington walked his father's oldest friend up to the house to save the ranch. The number Darrell Kettering wrote on the letter of intent 40 minutes later at the kitchen table in his careful old man's hand was $385,000. For the breeding rights and a first tranche of animals, with more to come. Emily read it and put her hand over her mouth. Caleb read it and had to stand up and walk to the window and stand there with his back to the room for a minute, because $189,000 had been the number that was going to end his family. And here was a number more than twice that size for a thing he'd nearly sold to Sterling for pennies, for a thing he'd nearly let die because he'd been too alone and too tired to see what his own father had left him. "Sign it, Darrell," Caleb said without turning around, his voice thick, Before I wake up." Kettering signed it. Emily signed as the appraiser attesting to value. Caleb signed last, his cracked hand steady on the pen, and then Emily photographed every page and sent it to Ruth Okafor in Helena at 11:51 in the morning, and Ruth Okafor called back 4 minutes later and said only, "I'm filing at 2 o'clock, along with Voss's affidavit. Tell your rancher the water's going down."
I setting.
The hearing was Friday morning, the same Friday the bank had meant to take everything. Caleb wore his father's suit. It didn't fit quite right. His father had been a bigger man through the shoulders. He sat in a courtroom in Helena beside Ruth Okafor, a small, fierce woman who'd driven all night on documents and outrage with Emily on his other side and Nia between them in a church dress sworn to silence and holding both their hands. Marcus Sterling was not there. That was the thing Caleb hadn't expected. He'd braced himself for Sterling across the aisle for the gray suit and the daylight smile for one last round. But Sterling wasn't there, and neither was Voss. And in Voss's chair at the bank's table sat a nervous young associate who'd clearly been handed a fire the night before and told to go put it out with his bare hands. Ruth Okafor stood up, and she laid it out for the judge in 11 minutes flat, and it was a thing of terrible beauty. She put the bank's appraisal next to Emily's appraisal. She put Kettering's $385,000 letter of intent on the record. And then, when the young associate tried to argue that the sale should proceed anyway, she put down Voss's sworn affidavit, the emails, the instruction, the false complaint filed to silence the appraiser. And she watched the judge's face change as he read it, and she said quietly, "Your Honor, my client didn't fall behind because he's a poor manager. He fell behind because his wife died, and he spent 3 years raising their daughter and holding on to his family's 101-year-old ranch by himself. And in his lowest moment, a developer tried to buy $250,000 of assets for the price of a used tractor, and when a licensed appraiser caught it, that developer filed a fraudulent complaint to shut her up before this exact hearing. That's not a foreclosure, Your Honor. That's a fraud with a foreclosure wrapped around it. I move that the sale be stayed and the note reinstated on its original terms, and I've submitted to the court the buyer's letter of intent, showing my client will satisfy the debt in full within 30 days. The judge read Voss's affidavit twice. He looked at the bank's associate. Does the bank have any response to the allegation that its agent filed a fraudulent licensing complaint to interfere with these proceedings? The young associate stood up and sat back down, and stood up again and said, "The bank was not aware, Your Honor, and the bank withdraws its objection to the stay." "I imagine it does," the judge said. He granted the stay. He reinstated the note. He gave Caleb 30 days to close with Kettering and satisfy the debt which Caleb would do in 19. And then, before he moved on, the judge looked down over his glasses at the man in the too big suit and the little girl in the church dress. And he said something that wasn't in any statute that Caleb would remember for the rest of his life. "Mr. Washington, I've been on this bench 18 years, and I've signed more of these foreclosures than I care to count. And most of the time there's nothing I can do but sign them and go home and not think about it. So I want you to understand, it's a rare thing what happened in my courtroom this morning." He set his pen down. "You held on to something worth holding on to, and you did it in the hardest way there is. And when it counted, you had people willing to stand up beside you. That's rarer than you know. Don't waste it. This court is adjourned." The gavel came down, and Caleb Washington sat in a courtroom in his dead father's suit, holding his daughter's hand on one side and Emily Hartwell's on the other, and felt 3 years of weight, 3 years of a whole world balanced on 2 shoulders, 3 years of dragging bleeding animals up hills alone and lying awake to the sound of a dying refrigerator, and telling everyone, especially himself, that he had it handled, felt all of it all at once, finally mercifully lift. He didn't cry in the courtroom. He waited until they were outside on the courthouse steps in the cold, bright Montana morning. And then he crouched down and pulled his daughter into him and held on to her like she was the only solid thing in the world. And over the top of her head, he found Emily's eyes, and he didn't have to say any of it because she was already reaching out to put her hand on the back of his neck, on the neck of a man who had not been touched with tenderness by another adult in 3 long years. And the 3 of them stood there on the steps of the courthouse holding on while the water went all the way down. They drove home from Helena, 3 across in the truck cab, Nia in the middle, and about halfway there she fell asleep against Emily's shoulder, and Caleb glanced over and saw it and had to look back at the road fast, because the sight of it, his daughter asleep against this woman, like it was the most natural thing in the world, did something to him he wasn't ready for yet. "She trusts you," Caleb said quietly so as not to wake her. "You know how rare that is now. I told you the first night. You told me." Emily looked down at the sleeping girl, careful not to move. "I don't take it lightly, Caleb. I want you to know that. I've watched what happens to kids when adults come into their lives and then leave. I did the paperwork on a lot of those families too. I'm not going to be another person who taught your daughter to trust and then disappeared." "I know. You don't know. You hope." She said it gently. "That's the thing about what you said at the doorway Wednesday night, about the answer coming when the water goes down. The water went down this morning, Caleb. So now you've got to actually mean it, and meaning it is harder than saying it underwater. Underwater, you'll grab anything. On dry land, you have to choose." She looked over at him. "I'm not going anywhere in the next 30 days regardless. I've got a closing to help you get through, and a lawyer who wants to talk to me about 39 other families. So there's no clock on you anymore. Take your time. Be sure. That's all I'm asking. Be sure it's me, and not just relief." Caleb drove for a while without answering. "Can I tell you what I was actually scared of?" he said finally. "Wednesday night. It wasn't Sterling. It wasn't even losing the ranch, not really." He kept his eyes on the road. "I was scared that if I let myself want you, you specifically, not just help, not just somebody to carry the weight, then I'd be putting you in the exact spot that broke me. Because I've buried a woman I loved, Emily. I stood in a hallway and got told there was nothing anybody could do, and it near killed me, and I promised myself I would never ever line up to feel that again. And then you drove up my road, and I watched you flip a lawyer and save my whole life in 3 days, and I thought, I can't love somebody again. I don't survive it a second time. Caleb, let me finish. I've been working up to this since Helena." He pulled in a breath. "But then I got to thinking about what you said to me the first morning at the gate. You said I didn't need saving, I needed help. And those were different words, and only a certain kind of man mixed them up. And I've been mixing up 2 words my own self for 3 years. I've been telling myself that loving somebody and losing somebody are the same thing. That if I love you, I'm just signing up to lose you. And they're not the same, Emily. They're different words. My father'd have known the difference. Loving Denise wasn't the thing that broke me. Losing her broke me. But the loving," his voice caught and he pushed through it. "The loving was the best years I ever had. I'd do all of it again. Every day of it. Even knowing how it ended. And it took a woman who lost her own husband and her own ranch and still drove out to help a stranger for me to understand that. You didn't quit on loving after you lost. You just went looking for somewhere to put it. That's braver than anything I've done in 3 years." Emily was crying now quietly, one arm still around the sleeping child so as not to wake her. "So here's my answer," Caleb said. "The one I wouldn't say underwater. I'm not going to ask you to marry me at 70 miles an hour on Highway 12 with my kid asleep between us. You deserve better than that, and so does she, and so do I. But I'm telling you the answer's yes to the question underneath all the other questions. Yes, I want you to come inside the house. Yes, I want you to stay. Not to run the ranch. I mean, I want that too. But that's not the thing. I want you to stay because a year from now, I want to be the kind of tired that comes from a good day, sitting on that porch with you in the other chair, watching Nia do something that reminds me of her mother and her great-granddad, and God help us, probably you too by then." He glanced over. "That's the answer. The water's down and I'm sure, and it's me talking, not the fear. I checked. It's me." Emily wiped her face with the back of her free hand. "That's the worst proposal that isn't a proposal I have ever heard," she said, and she was laughing and crying at the same time. "I said I wasn't proposing. I know what you said." She looked over at him, and her eyes were wrecked and shining and absolutely certain. "Yes, Caleb. Whatever the question ends up being, whenever you finally work up the nerve to ask it right with your feet on the ground, and a ring you probably can't afford yet, the answer's already yes. I decided it somewhere around the time your daughter offered to show me where you keep the better coffee. I just didn't let myself say it because I was scared too. Same as you. Scared clean through. And I did the hard thing anyway, right? Isn't that what your daddy said it was?" "That's what he said it was." Between them, without waking, Nia sighed in her sleep and burrowed a little deeper into Emily's side, and neither one of the adults said anything for a long while after that, because there wasn't anything that needed saying. The truck ran on toward home through the cold, bright morning, and the ranch was safe, and the water was down, and for the first time in 3 years, Caleb Washington was driving toward something instead of away from the wreck of everything. What to say? They closed with Kettering 19 days later. The check cleared, and Caleb drove to First Cattleman's Bank in his work clothes, not his father's suit, and he paid off a $189,000 note that had nearly taken his family and Pete. The loan officer came out from behind his desk and shook Caleb's hand and said, "I never wanted it to go the way it was going, Caleb. I want you to know that—" And Caleb believed him because Pete was just a man doing a job at an institution that counted heads instead of seeing them same as Emily had been once. And Caleb had learned that spring to tell the difference between the men who were the machine and the men who just got caught inside it. Marcus Sterling did not fare as well. Voss's affidavit did not stay quiet. Ruth Okafor, it turned out, was not the kind of lawyer who won one fight and went home. She took what Voss had handed her, the emails, the instruction, the false licensing complaint, and she did not let it go. There was an investigation. There was a second developer and then a third family who came forward once the story got around that somebody had finally beaten Sterling at his own game. It turned out the Washington Ranch had not been the first time Sterling had lowballed an appraisal and leaned on the desperate and hurried the vulnerable toward a fire sale. It had only been the first time somebody with the skill to see it and the will to fight it had been standing in the yard. Sterling didn't go to prison. Men like Sterling rarely do. But his development company lost its financing when the story broke, and the bank quietly ended its relationship with him. And the last Caleb heard, Marcus Sterling had moved his operation 2 states over to start again somewhere. The name didn't mean anything yet. Emily heard about it and was quiet for a while, thinking about the families 2 states over who didn't know what was coming. "We can't save all of them," Caleb said. "No," Emily agreed. "But Ruth and I are going to save the next one, and the one after that. That's the deal I made with her." She looked at Caleb. "That's going to mean me being gone sometimes, driving to other people's ranches on other people's worst days. Except now I'll be showing up on the right side of the fence with a lawyer behind me instead of doing the paperwork. You understand what I'm telling you? I'm not going to just be a rancher's wife. I found the thing I'm for. You gave it back to me that first week when you told me I wasn't doing your paperwork, I was doing ours. I need to do it for other people now. That's who I am." "I know exactly who you are," Caleb said. "I knew the first morning. You think I want to marry a woman who'd stay home." He shook his head. "I want to marry the woman who drove back out to a doomed ranch on her own time because she couldn't drive away from it twice. You go save the next family, Emily. You go save all of them you can. This ranch will be right here when you get home, and so will we." He did propose eventually. Properly. Feet on the ground in the far pasture at the fence where she'd stood the first day and cried at the sight of 40 years of his father's work, because that was the spot where he'd first understood she saw the ranch the way he wished he could, the way his father had not as a number, but as a living thing. He'd saved for the ring the honest way out of the Kettering money after the note was clear, and the roof was fixed, and Nia had new boots that fit. It was not a big ring. Emily cried anyway and said yes anyway, the way she'd already said yes on Highway 12, with a sleeping child between them and Nia, who had been hiding behind the water trough on strict instructions to stay hidden until the exact right moment, and had lasted about 11 seconds, came tearing across the pasture hollering that she got to be the one to hold the flowers. She'd already decided nobody could talk her out of it. She'd planted her feet. They married in the fall in the yard under the cottonwood James Washington had planted the year Caleb was born. It wasn't a big wedding. Darrell Kettering drove down from Billings and gave a toast about a bull his daddy bought in 1989 and cried halfway through it and didn't care. Ruth Okafor came and met the doc who'd carried Caleb's vet bills on account, and they argued about politics all night and left together, which surprised everyone but themselves. And Naya held the flowers exactly as she'd decided, and when the vows were done, she announced to the entire assembled crowd, in the carrying voice of a child who has been waiting a long time for the adults to catch up, "I told you she was going to come inside the house." And everybody laughed, and Caleb pulled his daughter and his new wife both into his arms at once, and that was that. The ranch did not become rich. That's worth saying plainly, because the story could pretend otherwise, and it would be a lie. And this was never a story about getting rich. What happened was harder and better than rich. The Kettering money paid the note and fixed the roof and bought a new well for the far pasture, and it bought Caleb something he hadn't had in 3 years, which was room to breathe, room to plan, past the next payment room to run the ranch the way his father had run it instead of just staggering from one emergency to the next. Emily brought in the sustainable grazing methods she'd learned on her own lost ranch, married them to James Washington's breeding program. And within 2 years, the Washington Ranch was doing something almost nobody in that part of Montana was doing, which was making a modest, honest, dependable living off a piece of ground that everyone had written off as too dry and too big and too far gone. Kettering came back every season for the breeding stock, and he brought other cattlemen with him. Serious men who understood what the Washington line was, and the far pasture that Sterling had once tried to steal for the price of a used tractor became in time one of the most respected sources of genetics on the northern range. Not the biggest, not the richest. The most respected, which was a different and better thing, and which was exactly what James Washington had built and never lived to see honored. They put up a sign at the gate. It just said Washington Ranch St. 1923. Emily wanted to put both their names on it. Caleb said no. "It's not that I don't want your name on it," he told her. "Your name's on everything. Your name's on the whole life we've got. But that sign's got 101 years of Washingtons behind it, and it's going to have Naya and her kids after. And the thing about our name Emily, it was never really about the name. It was about who we are. It was about not selling the thing that matters for pennies just because you're tired and alone and somebody in a nice suit tells you it's too big to carry." He looked at the sign. "You didn't marry into a name. You married into that. That's yours already. You don't need it painted on a board." Emily didn't argue. She understood him by then better than she'd understood anyone in her life. The refrigerator got fixed, then it got replaced. Small thing. But Caleb noticed it the first night the kitchen was quiet. Really noticed it, the absence of that dying sound he'd fallen asleep to for 3 years, and he stood in the dark kitchen a while in the quiet. And he thought about the man he'd been sitting at that same table with his face in his hands and a number he couldn't pay, smoothed flat under a bleeding knuckle. Absolutely certain he was going to lose everything, and absolutely certain he was going to lose it alone. That man felt like a stranger now. A stranger Caleb was grateful to and sorry for and glad to have left behind. Yeah, Nia grew up on that ranch the way Caleb had promised her she would. The morning the bus came, and she'd asked him in the flat, measuring voice of a child who hears things at night whether the ranch was in trouble. She grew up with a safe place under her feet, and a mother who came home from other people's worst days with stories about families she'd helped stand their ground. She grew up knowing what she came from. The good ones. The brilliant people, the 101 years. Because Emily had been right that first week that a kid ought to know. And Caleb told her over and over at the fence, and at the kitchen table, and in the far pasture, until it was in her, the way the breeding was in the cattle, bone deep and permanent. She was 14 when she asked Emily one evening on the porch, the two of them shelling peas while Caleb worked a colt in the near pen, whether she remembered exactly what she'd said the first day. The very first thing. At the gate. "I said a lot of things the first day," Emily said. "The ranch thing. When you told Dad it was too big." Emily set down the bowl. She looked out at Caleb and the colt at 600 acres gone gold in the evening. At the sign at the gate, she still didn't have her name on and didn't need to. "I said his ranch was too big for one person," Emily said. "And your daddy thought I was about to tell him to give it up because that's what everybody had been telling him. The bank, the developer, his own tired self at 3 in the morning. Everybody looked at this place and told him it was too much for one man and he ought to let it go." She picked the bowl back up. "But that's not what too big means. That's what everybody gets wrong. The ranch was never too big, Nia. It was exactly the right size. The problem was never the size of the thing your daddy was carrying." She looked over at the girl. "The problem was that he was carrying it alone. Set a weight down between two people and it's not too heavy anymore. It's just a weight. That's all it ever was. Not too big. Just too much for one." Nia thought about that the way she thought about everything completely without blinking. "So you didn't save him," she said finally. "That's what you always say. You get mad when people say you saved him." "I didn't save him," Emily said firmly. "Your daddy saved himself. He kept this place alive 3 years before I ever drove up that road alone with you to raise. And he'd have found a way with or without me. He had the cattle. He had your granddad's work. He had everything he needed and didn't know it. I didn't save your father, baby. And he didn't save me either, though the good Lord knows I was drowning worse than he was when I got here." She smiled out at the man in the pen, the colt coming soft and easy under his patient hands. "We didn't save each other. That's a fairy tale, and this was never a fairy tale. What we did was harder. We stood next to each other while we each saved ourselves. And then we just never stopped standing there." She bumped Nia's shoulder with her own. "That's the whole secret if you ever want it. Don't go looking for somebody to save you. You save your own self every time that's your job and nobody else's. But find the one who'll stand next to you in the yard while you do it, and never make you carry the weight alone, and never once try to take it away from you either, because taking it away is just a nicer way of saying you couldn't handle it. Your daddy could always handle it. He just shouldn't have had to handle it by himself. Nobody should." Hidden. Caleb came up to the porch, then wiping his hands, the colt settled and the light going. He caught the tail end of it. He always seemed to catch the tail end of Emily, saying the truest things, the same way he'd caught her at the fence that first morning. And he stood at the bottom of the steps, looking up at the two of them. His wife and his daughter shelling peas in the last of the light on the porch of a ranch that 6 years ago he'd been 72 hours from losing. "What are you two solving up here?" he said. "Emily's telling me the secret of everything," Nia said. "Oh yeah, she'd tell you the good coffee's still in the same place." "It's not a joke, Dad." "I know it's not." He came up the steps. He sat down in the third chair, the one that had been empty for 3 years and hadn't been empty for 6. And he took the bowl of shelled peas and set it aside, and he took his wife's hand in one of his and put his other arm around his daughter, and the three of them sat there while the sun went down over 600 acres of the only thing his family had ever truly owned. "It's a good ranch," Caleb said after a while. "It's too big," Emily said, and there was the ghost of the very first smile in it, the one from the gate 6 years old now and worn smooth as a river stone between them. Caleb laughed low the way he'd first laughed the second morning, when he'd been afraid he'd forgotten how. "Yeah," he said. "It is. It's way too big." "Then why are you smiling?" And Caleb Washington looked out at his father's land at the fence line, running to the horizon, the way it had run before he was born, and the way it would run after he was gone, with his daughter's kids on the other side of it someday. And he pulled his family in close against him on the porch in the last of the gold light, and he gave the same answer he'd been giving her for 6 years. The truest answer he had, the only one that had ever mattered, because I finally stopped trying to carry it alone. The ranch was never too big. The weight was only ever too much for one. And the greatest thing that ever happened to Caleb Washington was not saving the land, and it was not beating the man in the gray suit, and it was not the money or the sign or the 101 years. It was the morning he stopped standing at his gate alone and let somebody stand there with him.